My name is Bear Saragusa, and this is the Hunting Hound podcast presented by W Hunting Supply.
I'm here with Bob Ford from Pennsylvania, born and bred, author of Beagle Tales 1 through 8.
1 through 8, and then there's one volume of just all Christmas stories.
Okay. And a cookbook.
And the cookbook, yeah.
That's right. Methodist pastor, Beagle man, to the bone. What did I miss?
I think that's it.
I think that's about it. Yeah. Well, thanks so much for coming on. I've been wanting to talk to you for a long time. I read your books. I started reading your books when I was down with pneumonia. That was a while ago. That was quite some years ago, and I just couldn't put them down. I ended up working through the entire series more or less not in one sitting. That'd be a lie, but without going on to other things. Yeah.
Yeah.
And they're just so much fun. Your books are great.
Oh, thanks. Yeah.
Yeah. What you got started with Beagles together with your dad, is that correct?
Correct. My father had Beagles in the 50s and 60s and sort of got out of that. And I was born 1972, and not even realizing my father had Beagles when he was a younger man. And keep in mind, my dad was 45 when I was born. My mother was a second wife for him.
Okay.
So he had a whole family, and then he got married to my mom and had, my sister and I.
Mm-hmm.
And I just begged for a Beagle for the longest time. And I didn't realize he had Beagles when he was young. And got my first Beagle when I was 13. I've had one ever since.
Wow. What's fascinated me a little bit reading your books is that, a lot of times you'll read books and you'll lose track of people's good dogs. They'll name a dog and then in the next chapter it'll be a dog you've never heard of, and et cetera, et cetera. You've had some Beagles throughout the years, but it's not as many as you would think somebody who's been doing it as long as you have would have. Right. You put a lot of time into each individual dog.
Right. Right. And when I was a kid and then through, high school and college, I had a kennel.
Yeah.
And you can have as many dogs as you want in a kennel. When I became a pastor, I wasn't going to build a $3,000 kennel and then have the bishop say you're moving to a new church next year.
Sure.
So just a handful of house dogs.
Yeah.
But they get lots of rabbit tracks, and they're not all the best or the most fantastic, but I develop them to all they're going to be,
Right. I find that's not, I think that's underestimated how much that actually has to say in terms of what a dog is eventually going to turn out to be. Because I have seen some brilliant natural talents just never make it off the start line because they didn't have the time put it into them. But I've seen on the flip side some less impressive dogs become very, very good just based on the amount of time and energy put into them.
And I still think it's mostly genetics, but I don't know that I believe a handler can make a dog if it's never has the genetics. Right. But I think there's a lot a handler can do wrong to make a good dog worse.
That's a good way to put it. Yeah. What but what was it that gave you that attitude? Was that your dad's attitude as well? Like, because my experience has been that's an unusual attitude. Putting the amount of time into the dogs that you've got and working with what you've got is especially in today's world and social media where you're inundated with offers of super dogs, quote unquote.
Right.
Right. It's hard to put in the time with what you've got in front of you. Where did you get that?
Well, now keep in mind, I'm in Pennsylvania. I've lived here, Pennsylvania, all my life outside of what I call the Babylonian exile years, where I spent 3 years in Ohio going to seminary.
Okay.
It was so flat there, I would just wake up every day depressed at the lack of topography in central Ohio, just like, oh, hell, here we go again. And but in Pennsylvania, to this day, there are still more Beagle clubs in Pennsylvania than anywhere.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
I mean, there's just a ton of them, but a lot of them are still brace dogs, the traditional brace dogs. And if you do a YouTube search for traditional brace beagles, you will see dogs that bark 25, 30 times before they take a step.
Okay. Yep.
I mean, that's how slow. And by the time I got my first beagle in 1985, that's how the brace dog world was. Okay. SPO had taken off, but it wasn't big where we lived, the SPO style dogs. So, and the first time we saw a field trial, my dad was in awe. He said, in the 1950s, I would go to these trials. The dogs were so fast, the judges had to have horses.
Right.
To keep up. But then they, through, and give them credit if that's what you like. I mean, I can't stand watching that style of dog, but give them credit if that's what you like. The brace boys did a really good job of slowing them down. And, they actually use a term, they go slow enough that they're never going to circle a rabbit. Okay. And when the scent gets cold, they're just boo, 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 boo on the line. And when the scent gets too cold to go any further, and I've heard traditional brace guys say this, they like them to just stand there and go silent. And they call that dying beautifully on the line. Okay. That's very, the term they use.
Very poetic.
Very poetic, isn't it? I mean, it makes it sound a lot better than can't hunt with this dog. Right. So, by the time I was getting into beagles, the small pack option was starting, but it wasn't real popular where I was. And all my dad and I did was hunt rabbits and listen to them chase when it wasn't rabbit season. And so we ran them hard just because we enjoyed running dogs. We weren't competing in field. Now you see guys that are all about the field trials and not so much about just outrunning dogs. I mean, it's like any other sort of hobby or pursuit or sport. You get people that are more involved in the competition than they are. And, if there wasn't ribbons and trophies involved, would they still do it?
Right. I mean, that is the good question. It's I wonder a little bit about that sometimes, in really all dog sports, but, in sort of speaking specifically of hounds, whether, how many of these people that do it would do it if they didn't have the trophy or Instagram photo or, whatever is. Mm-hmm. I sometimes wonder whether the main motivation is maybe not getting out there with the dogs, but actually being able to show off afterwards, potentially, for some people anyway.
And, there's a non-field trial component of that too, where, can I get 10 of my best friends together and how many rabbits can I put on the tailgate?
Sure. Right. Yeah. Total number of, yep.
And, that's, some people are opposed to that. Hey, I don't care how many rabbits people shoot. If they follow the daily limit laws, if you want to take 10 guys and take down 40, good for you. You know?
Right.
It's not what I do because I try to get good chases all hunting season. And if I did that, I would run out of spots quick. Right.
Sure. I mean, that makes sense, but, having said that though, you wrote a cookbook, so you're not one of those guys that's hunting just.
Oh no,
you're not leaving those rabbits out in the ditch. You do a lot with those rabbits.
I do. And I shoot a lot of rabbits. And mostly because, I'll go every day of the hunting season.
Right.
Even if it's the last hour of daylight.
Right.
And if I do that, my goal is to get 60 minutes of hound music and put a rabbit in a vest and go home.
Yep.
But I mean, that's 6 rabbits a week.
Right.
I can't hunt Sundays. That's 6 rabbits a week.
Right. Right. I mean, and that was one thing, I've had some bigger hounds. I had a plot that, anybody who's listening to has listened to the podcast before has heard many stories about, that's now down with a buddy of mine. But I just got, I guess about 6 weeks ago, I picked up a beagle pup. And I had a beagle growing up that I hadn't hunted with, but I always liked the breed because of that. And getting back into beagles now seemed appropriate in terms of my kids and where they were at and things like that. But a major motivator for that is because beagles it's such a nice dog to fit into a busy schedule and have in the house. Like, you can have them be a part of the family, but then if you've got as you say, if you've got an hour, you've got 60 minutes of fun ahead of you. It's
right.
It's not going to turn into, like with the plot, if I tried to do that hour of fun could very quickly turn into 38 hours of, a 38-hour ordeal to try and get him back.
To try to get the dog back. Yeah.
Right.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So they're such great little dogs. But before we get more into your dogs and things like that, what is it about Pennsylvania? Because somebody asked me about that. I mentioned I was having you on, and it's like, what does he run? And I said, well, beagles. He's like, let me guess. He's from Pennsylvania. And I've interviewed a couple of beagle guys, and I think all of you have been from Pennsylvania so far. What is it about Pennsylvania that attracts the beaglers?
In comparison to, say, bird dogs, or even in comparison to, say, coon dogs, it's not as expensive of a sport.
Okay.
And I know when I would talk to my dad about it, he was born in 1927. Mm-hmm. He's passed away, of course, but he said back then, he said it wasn't like everybody had 6 dogs in the yard. He's like, everybody had 1 dog in the yard, and he said, and it was used to put food on the table.
Sure.
And it was an affordable working class sport.
Yeah.
And I know that very early on, there were a lot of beagle clubs that did, field trials, competitions, and, they just, Pennsylvania just really exploded with that. And sometimes I wonder, and, I don't have the answer why those numbers are there, but sometimes I think about it this way. We're at the very southern edge of where you will find snowshoe hare.
Mm-hmm.
And we're far enough north that in May and June, you're not running dogs in 90-degree weather yet.
Sure.
And, the terrain is good too. And I think still dairy's one of the top money makers in the state of Pennsylvania. People don't often think of Pennsylvania that way. No. So you always had all these old farms and hedgerows and,
sure.
it just,
perfect cover. Yeah.
Perfect cover, a lot of logging industry, and, you get clear cutting a chunk of ground, you got rabbits. Right. So I always, I think a lot of people not from Pennsylvania think of us as Pittsburgh and Philly. But man, everything in the middle is way different.
Sure. Oh, that makes sense. It's, we don't have much in the way of rabbits here. We have a bunch of these, they look like snowshoe hares, but a English listener of mine, just pointed out to me that they're not actually snowshoe hares. They turn white. They look, to me, exactly the same. But
okay.
They're the mountain hare.
So it's not the European hare either. They don't change colors.
I'm talking it's a European mountain hare.
Yeah.
That will turn white like a snowshoe, but it's not. It's actually a different type of. It's a little bit bigger.
It's not like the. It's not like the European hare they'll run in Spain and in Greece. That's I think they stay brown all year. Don't
They do, yeah. They've got what they call here the southern hair, which is what you're
Okay.
talking about. Yeah, that'll stay
Okay.
brown, and you don't need to go that far to get those. You know, they've got those down in Sweden, or
Oh hell!
southern
Now you
Sweden.
put a new species. Now you put a new species on my radar, which I try to collect.
Well, if you ever want to come to Norway and hunt mountain hare over beagles, I might know a guy.
Yeah.
Oh, it's yeah, I'm excited about it. You know, they're not as you know, I talk to, you know, I talk to guys over there, and you know, they're talking about sight races and things like that, getting puppies started, because that's kind of where my head is at this point, is trying to, you know, figure out how I'm gonna get this pup started. And it's hard to get a sight chase on one of these hares because they're super aware of what's going on. There's not a ton of, I mean, there's enough of them, but there's not a ton of them.
Mm-hmm.
So to get a sight chase on one of those hares is difficult, because they usually know you're there before you know they're there, and they're going to run. They're not going to hunker down and hope that you walk by. They're going to get up and run way before you get there.
Yeah.
So I'm a little bit curious how
it's going to take a lot of foot to keep close to them too. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So it's going to be. I'm excited to see how it plays out. You know, I've always had this attitude with all the other hounds that I've started that, you know, if I haven't worn out a good pair of boots before that dog is 2 years old, then I've done something wrong. You know, then I haven't been moving enough to keep, you know, and I think I'm going to apply that same thing to this beagle, even though his legs are a little shorter.
You could start on a more plentiful species somewhere, or is that the most plentiful there?
That's going to be the most plentiful species of like what would you call it? Rabbit type animals.
Right.
Yeah.
I was going to say, if going south got that southern hare, if there was more of them, I might go down there and see if I could get them started easier.
Yeah, I think that's actually what I'm going to do, because I was down at a wedding here in southern Sweden last weekend, I guess it was, or the weekend before. And it was an 11-hour drive south from here, but the last 15 minutes, there were hares. It was middle of the night, but there were hares and rabbits crossing the road all over the place. It's been 15 years since I've hit anything bigger than a squirrel, and I hit 2 rabbits with the truck in the space of about 10 minutes, and I was actively trying not to hit them. So I might go down there with them, I think, yeah.
Just drive down there at dusk with the tracking collar on the dog, and when you see one cross the road,
right,
put them on the mark line.
Right, exactly.
Just so they can get a scent of it, you know, give them the scent.
Yeah, exactly. And I was out pig hunting because that's my buddies down there. That's what they're really enthusiastic about is the pig hunting.
Yeah.
And so I had one of them had this thermal like spotting scope that he was showing me. And he was telling me about it as we're driving, and I stuck it out of the window and looked at a field that we were driving by, and it was lit up like a Christmas tree. There were so many hare on that field. Unbelievable. So I think that's what I'm going to end up doing, is go down there for a week and just try and get him started on those, and then we'll come back and work on.
In State College, Pennsylvania, there was an Austrian restaurant, and the old timer that owned it, he's passed away, but he was from Austria, and he knew I hunted, and he said, all we eat's hare back home. I said, yeah. I said, you hunt them with dogs? No. He said, we go out at night when there's a nice bright moon and we shoot them, and all we eat's the back.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, which but I mean, it was more of kind of keeping the population down there,
sure,
and things, but the idea of night hunting rabbits had never crossed my mind. I mean, I'll train dogs at night once in a while, but I typically don't run that much at night. But yeah. So I can imagine if if you had the optics to see them like that at night. I can just imagine what that would be like, you know?
Yeah, it was really I was taken aback. I couldn't really believe that there were so many of them out there. I kind of, had to ask him to stop and, to make sure I wasn't seeing double here. There were more hairs than made sense in my head, but
Yeah.
it was a cool experience.
Nice.
So, but he was a restaurateur, like he ran that restaurant, that Austrian guy.
Yeah, right up until he retired, and then the family took over, and they eventually moved to other ventures. But
Okay.
yeah, I mean, I would go in. He had some kind of a stag that at one time was like the 10th biggest in all of Europe, hanging on the wall.
Oh wow, cool.
And he always told me, "Oh, if you want to go to Austria, my family has X number of not acres, hectare."
Yep, sure.
And I'm like, well, if I ever ring up the money to go do it, maybe I will.
Right.
And, but I know when he retired and sold his house and moved into a smaller place, he gave me a whole bunch of traditional Austrian hunting clothing.
Oh, cool. That's really cool. I love stuff like that. Did he have recipes that he shared with you? Did any of the recipes you've got in that book sort of stem from stuff that you...
One of them did. A Zegadiner sauerkraut, which is like a real spicy sauerkraut.
Yeah.
And they add a lot of paprika and other spicy things to it, so that it's almost like a hot sauerkraut, real spicy hot. And then they always, I think it's Krautfleisch Zigading or something. It's got a lot of meat in it.
Sure.
So the way I would do it is I would take... I used to use a crock pot. Now I use a pressure cooker. Debone 4 or 5 rabbits, throw it in the pressure cooker and just obliterate it.
Okay.
And then add the sauerkraut and cook it till it's done, but not too mushy. And then add all those spices to it. And
that sounds great.
It's a big hit at, here in Pennsylvania and a lot of other places. Pork and sauerkraut's a traditional dish, and I'll serve rabbit and sauerkraut and nobody knows the difference.
Oh, that's cool.
I'll put a little bacon in it to make sure it's got some pork in it,
Cool. I want to talk a little bit about your books, because you're a prolific writer. How did you get started doing that? How did you get started with the writing?
Well, at one point, trying to think. At one point, there were 4 Beagle specific magazines. None of them over 4,000 readers, or 5,000. So there was Better Beagling, Hounds and Hunting, the Rabbit Hunter, and the American Beagler. And I don't think the American Beagler exists anymore. Hounds and Hunting and Better Beagling combined. But anyway, at that time, 2001. I'm reading all the magazines, and I thought, there's nobody writing humor. And I probably write more humor than I do anything. I mean, not that it's all humor. I do other things too. And, this is 2000, I guess, or 2001. Bob Baker, who owned a Better Beagling based out of Vermont, they had a fax number listed in the front cover of the magazine. So I wrote a story. Boy, and I don't remember what it was now, but I could figure it out. And I faxed it to him.
Okay.
And I said, would you be interested in buying anything like this? And he said, can you give me one of these a month? And I said, yeah. He said, yeah. And I've been doing it ever since November 2001. I've been writing.
Wow. How do you, it's amazing to me that you're able to find time for all of the things that you do. Because it's not like you can phone it in as a pastor. That requires a lot of dedication and time spent sort of formulating what you're going to say, I should think. And then you've got the Beagles on top of that and the writing on top of that. Have you found an extra hour in the day that the rest of us don't know about? Or how are you making that work? That's amazing.
I I do a lot of sermon writing while I'm running dogs.
Okay.
And so what I very often do is Sunday night, I pick a text that I'm going to preach, and I will, with the aid of lexicons and other things, I'll go and look at the Greek or Hebrew, whatever it's written in, look at it, got some commentaries, and I'll study the big shots, the big brains and what they've said about the text. And then from there, once I get my ideas or points that I want for a sermon, I always, consider that the tree of a sermon, right? So that's the frame of it. And I use the analogy of a Christmas tree. So if I'm going to make a point about grace, or if I'm going to make a point about being in community or something, I get those points, which are the frame of the tree. And then I think of illustrations that reinforce those points.
Okay.
And I'll often do that while I'm running dogs, and I'll think, all right, I'm trying to talk about community. How do I do that? And I'll think, well, I'll say, I'm always jealous of the Apostle Paul. When you read his letter to the churches, he got to oversee big fights like the nature of the Eucharist, the nature of Christ, and all those things. Me, I just get to oversee fights over what color the carpet's going to be,
Right.
or something like that. And I'll think of a story of a specific, breaking of community in the church, and I always, tell the story. The church I was at before I was here, they had a pipe organ and got rid of it.
Okay.
And they put up a fake wall to hide where the pipes had been ripped off the wall, and there's nothing there. So they had the styrofoam fake wall about 3 feet back, and they stored the Christmas decorations back there.
Okay.
And there was a couple getting married, and they said, we want to restore that. We want to take that wall down because there's a beautiful stained glass window back there that got covered. And they're like, we want to get married. We want that window exposed. Can we do that? And I'm like, yeah, we can do that. We'll just, have a, conversation at the meeting, and they were going to pay for it. And Annabelle, God love Annabelle. I loved Annabelle, but she showed up, and her husband had passed away. And she said that wall was meant to be there forever.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, okay. And she convinced the council not to tear that wall down, which was held up by 2 2x4s, mind you.
Okay.
And so we did the wedding. I wasn't there. 10 years later, the couple calls me up and says, can you come up and, do the renewal of our vows? I'm not even living there anymore.
Right.
I'm like, yeah, I'll come up. And we walk in the church, and they say, okay, Pastor, what do you think? And that wall was down, and there's that beautiful stained glass window, and they had a choir loft up around there, and they looked at me and they said, what do you think? And I looked at the window and said, Annabelle's dead, isn't she? Right. So I'll kind of get points for a sermon, and then while I'm running the dog, I kind of trance out listening to dogs.
Sure.
I'll just sit there and think of things that might make an entertaining story to illustrate the sermon. And I do the same thing when I write, articles for, various hound magazines and
Sure.
and places like that. So I still have work I do indoors. I still have a lot of paperwork and study and, that kind of thing, exegesis for a sermon. But I do a lot of the thinking while I'm out in the woods. And I always carry a Bible in a Ziploc bag in case it rains.
Mm-hmm.
And I always carry a notebook.
Okay.
And
Wow.
a dove stool. And a dove stool that if I get into a place where I'm going to be able to see dogs a lot, I unfold the dove stool, sit down, get out the Bible and a notebook and work,
Okay. Wow. That's that's high level multitasking right there. That's amazing. That's cool.
Well, I mean, keep in mind, I had to have my wife set up this Zoom for me because I couldn't remember how to do it.
Right.
And, when people talk about the newest television shows, I don't have any idea what they're talking about.
Oh, well, neither do I. So that's,
so yes, there's multitasking, and there's just choices of how you're going to spend your time.
sure.
Too.
That's certainly true. I tend to, I write some articles for a couple for the W guys, the guys who present this podcast.
Yeah.
And then I write a column in Bear Hunting Magazine.
Yeah.
And did a column for quite a while in the Hunter's Horn, which is running like a running walker magazine.
Okay.
And yeah, I did a lot of that. The formulating of the sort of big ideas, the fine tuning, obviously I needed to do at home, but the big ideas, the points I wanted to hit on, things like that, I often do when I'm doing something else. Either I'm driving or I'm, working the dogs or whatever. It is very, you certainly need to have your focus on the dogs, but at the same time, if you're able to keep an eye on the dogs, it can become very sort of meditative to listen to them. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, at the height of it, I was writing 36 articles a year.
Okay. Wow, that's a lot of writing. Yeah.
And now I'm not writing near that much anymore or anything, but and if you read my books, then, I always tell people this. And there's a lot of people who don't hunt that like my books, which always kind of, and then I thought about it, there's only so many ways to tell a rabbit hunting story. They all basically say, we went hunting, the dogs did great, we killed some rabbits got away.
Right.
I mean, right. And I've always thought that's a had to be there kind of if you weren't there the day that happened.
Right.
If you're a reader who wasn't on that hunt, I'm not saying it's a bad story, but I'm saying so I actually was accused of not writing about dogs one time. And I thought about it and I said, say more.
Yeah.
And, they said, you actually use beagles as a vehicle to tell a different story.
Yep.
And I thought, yeah, you're probably right. You're probably right because, some of the more popular articles I've written in terms of humor have been conflicts exaggerated at times in my stories between my wife and I about dogs and,
sure,
taking her car to save gas money and the dogs getting her windows and backseat all dirty and all of this kind of a thing.
Right.
And, so a lot of the humor has nothing to do with dogs, but they're kind of in there,
Right.
But yeah, so that's, and I've written a lot of how-to pieces too. I've written several articles for Fur Fish Game.
Okay.
And, that's what they like.
Right.
How to, that's the format for that. That's not my favorite style of writing to do.
Right.
But that's what that magazine does. And I understand that.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it's one of the things I really did enjoy about your books. I would read it anyway, cause I'll read anything that, about beagles and hounds and hunting dogs and hunting in general, really. But what I did really like about your books and what kind of keeps me going back to them, is you are writing about much more than beagles, really. I mean, it's as you say, it's a vehicle for life lessons, loss, love. There's a lot of themes that you'll touch on. There. So it's not surprising to me at all to hear that people who have never hunted a day in their lives find something that resonates with them in the books.
Right. And people that own beagles as pets will buy it too. Because I'll have, I've had stories about the travails of having a beagle in your house.
Right.
And I always say, the same tenacity that will allow them to run a rabbit until it either goes in a groundhog hole or dies is the same stubbornness that if you fall asleep on the couch, they will get into your garbage.
Right. Exactly.
even though they know they're going to get in trouble.
Right.
And, that sort of resonates with anybody that's ever owned a beagle in the house.
Oh, yeah.
And so I'll have people buy the books that, I think I had one story about a dog. When my stepson was little, I kept finding wrappers on the floor. And I thought, why can't this kid pick up after himself when he makes a sandwich and all this? And I'm sitting there one day in the living room reading, and I hear this like kind of a slapping sound. And I walked in real quiet, and there's my dog Lady. She's dead now. She had learned to open the fridge.
Okay.
She had learned to open the fridge, and I kind of knew she had. I was waiting to see how she did it, because we came home from dinner one night and she had eaten a pack of hot dogs minus one or two, half a pound of provolone,
okay,
and a half a pound of turkey. And I mean, she just looked like a beer cask ready to break. And I'm like, and so, at that time, my stepson was 8, or I guess 10, 12 years old. We didn't need a child lock, but we have a child lock on our refrigerator just because of beagles.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
And, so, I mean, there's stories like that I add a little humor to make them funnier, that people that just own beagles as pets will buy the books just for those.
Oh, yeah.
Sort of stories.
100%. Yeah. I mean, it's, beagles are, I work as a veterinary nurse, and people talk about Labradors as sort of the gluttons of the dog world. They have nothing on beagles. They're farm league in comparison.
Oh yeah. We took dogs to a kennel one year when we went on vacation, and the woman said, and I picked the place because of their double fence system.
Yeah.
So they had these cement runs with chain link that no dog could probably get out of anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And then in the yard, there was a secondary fence. I thought, well, that's going to be good. Well, she had automatic food dispensers. I said, please don't use that with my dogs. And she said, oh, it's guaranteed. It will make dogs eat less. I use it all the time. Dogs eat less. I said, I don't believe you. And she had show dogs, and this was like her main money maker, was this big kennel. Like, I mean, it was a big kennel that people use for holidays and stuff.
Sure.
And I came back after a week, and they were huge. And I said, what did I ask you about that automatic food dispenser? Please don't use it. And she said, I only used it the first night. And we were gone for a week. And I said, and they're still that big. I said, how much have you been feeding them? Not very much. That's how much they ate the first night. I said, oh. And then she said, and I had to close them inside at night because they would go out into the outer chain link and howl at rabbits they could smell on the other side of the
fence.
They could smell them on the outside of the outer chain link. She said, I don't know if they could see them or smell them, but they would sit there and just howl. And I said, okay. So I don't know. She did take me back as a boarder again, but I don't know that she had a good experience the first time she had beagles.
That makes sense. We this was actually not that long ago. This was end of this past winter. I got a call at work saying I need to come in with my beagle. He's eaten something. And I said, okay, is he vomiting? No, he's not yet, but I need to come in and get some, some medicine to make him vomit up what he's eaten. And so I took down her information, and then just as she was sort of hanging up the phone, I was like, but just real quick, what did he eat? And she said, he ate the lining of my prosthetic leg.
Damn.
And I said, really? And she said, yeah, I went skiing and sweated a little bit. So he ate about, he ate the entire leather, like memory foam lining of her prosthetic leg. And this beagle came in and vomited up, an alligator worth of leather all over the place. It was, and that took the cake as the strangest thing I've heard a beagle eating. I've heard of sort of the traditional, sex toys, underwear, things like that. But the lining of a prosthetic leg, that was a new one even for me.
Yeah. I mean, I remember when my stepson was real young, we had a chocolate incident. And I know chocolate's poisonous to dogs. I know people that feed their dogs chocolate ice cream and they never have trouble. But I know it can have an accumulative effect and all that. And I remember calling my vet, and I've had a relationship with my vet so long, I can text her.
Yep.
And, I'm sure I put one of them kids through college, taking dogs there. But, I said, he got into chocolate, and she said peroxide.
Yep.
She said, take a turkey baster of peroxide and make them drink it. And if you have to, repeat it till he vomits everything up, including the paper. Well, if you'd have told me it took 2 adults and a kid to hold one beagle down to feed it peroxide, I wouldn't have believed you.
Yeah. No, they're little Hercules is when they want to be. A beagle that doesn't want to do something, we said they're more gluttonous than a Labrador. They're also more stubborn than a mule. They're
yeah.
That's too funny. Yeah, I remember our beagle we had to operate on our beagle because she got into a bag of cat food and ate to the point where she couldn't fit any more into her body.
Right.
So it sort of half digested and then solidified into this just solid football-sized clump of cat food that we needed to have operated out when I was a kid. I remember that from when I was a kid. They're unbelievable. But they're, the thing that makes them a pain in the butt to have in the, around the house is also kind of what makes them endearing and what makes them,
right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And after that dog that would get into the fridge, I'll let an old dog out if we're gone for 5-6 hours, but anything with enough athleticism to reach a kitchen counter
yeah,
and try to steal a loaf of bread or something, they all go in a crate while I'm gone for a few hours.
Yep. Same here. This beagle pup that I've got, he's 16 weeks old now. And he from really, really young, like I couldn't believe it the first time he did it. He was able to get up onto our couch, which is a fairly tall couch.
Mm-hmm.
But he was able to jump up onto the couch from like 9 or 10 weeks old, like much, much younger than made sense. But it was, of course, motivated by, the yogurt that my sons had eaten and not put away. It was,
right.
But let's talk a little bit more about your dogs. Your first that first dog you got. Do your current dogs all go back to those dogs? Have you kind of bred your way to where you are today, or what does that look like?
So there's that first dog I got in 1985 has an ancestor 4 or 5 generations back. That's also in what I have now. But what I have now is not a direct descendant of the ones in 85.
Okay.
We bred a couple litters, my dad and I. But then, after those dogs had died, I wound up buying fresh because I wasn't doing breeding while I was, I'm sort of a rare endangered species of people that went from high school to college to seminary.
Right.
And now there's a lot of pastors that are second or even third career pastors. But during those years when I was in college and in seminary, I'm holding on to the old stock I had. And then after I get out of seminary, I got to get something new.
Okay.
And I got in one of the magazines and found a bloodline I thought I would like, went and watched the dogs run.
Mm-hmm.
and said, yeah, I like the way those dogs run, and
Okay.
got started. I mean, there's a lot of hype in magazines when people have stud services out there. So I always like to go see the dog before
Sure.
I believe, oh, okay, it's got a bunch of trophies,
Right.
let's see how it runs.
Right. Yeah, I can see that. And how long ago was that?
1999 or 2000
Okay.
was when I changed bloodlines from what I had in 85.
Okay. And since then you've stuck to that. It's the same bloodline you're running now.
Everything I have now goes back to a dog I bought in 2000 or 99.
Okay. That's really cool. So yeah.
And now there's some outside crosses there too.
Oh, sure. Sure.
Yeah, but I got a good friend that lives in Massachusetts, and we've had 2 litters of pups together, including the one Diamond's out of.
Okay.
But yeah.
Cool. What is, I mentioned it really early on in this. What I find interesting is that, there's, in your books, there's maybe 10 dog names. Like I can't actually keep track. I didn't count them, but like very few considering how long you've been in the Beagles.
Right. Right.
What?
And there's a lot of times when I just say I cut the dogs loose and was and I don't give any dogs names in a lot of stories.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. But is that because you've realistically that's you haven't had a huge number of dogs, or are the ones that we hear in the book, are those like the ones that kind of stick out in your mind as the
kind of
special
both.
ones? Yeah.
Kind of both. And since 1980, so I'm 85, 95, 05, 15, 35, in 37 years, and it might be 37 years yesterday, I got my first Beagle.
Is that right? Wow.
Yeah. And we drove to Erie to get it. And let's see, 2, 4, 6, 8. I might have had 30 some dogs, and maybe 30 dogs in those years.
Yeah, right.
And there are stories where I don't mention any dogs' names because the actual name of the dog isn't always as important.
Right.
As what the greater narrative is. I mean, I did win a award for the Pennsylvania Outdoor Writers, which is a story that was hard for me to write. I had written about my rebel dog who died, and I shot my first rabbit with him when he was like 5 or 6 months old. And I went to a junkyard that a shirt-tailed church member had. They didn't come to church or belong, but they kind of were around a little bit. They owned a junkyard. And I would go up there to get work done. They said, there's rabbits all over here, but we won't let you use a shotgun because we don't want you damaging the cars.
Okay.
So I took this puppy up there, and he would take these rabbits out, and they would come out and stand on the paths, the dirt paths that were in between the stacks of cars.
Sure. Yeah.
And I was allowed to shoot them with a 22.
Okay. Yep.
And I'll be a son of a gun that I kind of hit one low. It went under a car and died. And that dog ate the entire rabbit. I couldn't reach him under the car.
Okay.
And he sat there and ate it as a pup. And I had a hard time getting him out because he was barely big enough to go into it before he ate it. Got sicker than you can imagine later. And that was his first rabbit. And then I narrated his last rabbit when he was old. And I realized he, wasn't going anywhere. He was so slow. And I took his tracking collar off because I'm like, where's he going to go?
Right.
And he was old, and that was his last hunt, and he was all happy. And, I used the traditional liturgy from a funeral service. I called the story Alpha and Omega.
Yeah.
His first rabbit and his last. That's the only 2 rabbits I talked about.
Right.
And the whole story was his first and his last, and I called it Alpha and Omega. And the whole rest of the story was how attached I was to this dog as a bond, and how tough it was for me to watch him die. And he had kidney failure, and you've probably seen this working in the business.
Yeah,
You set up the IVs at home, and you're putting liquid under the dog's skin to absorb and all that, and it was a tearjerker. And it's one of the biggest awards I've won from that. And I had trouble finishing it. So yeah, that's sort of one of the times when I do mention a dog's name in an article. But and sometimes I'll mention them tangentially, but it kind of all depends.
Right, that makes sense. What have you got for dogs now? I'm interested in the I just had a guy call me from Poland, and he just had a bad experience with a judge over there in his dogs. It's his first hound. It's not a beagle. It's a hound. It's a Polish hound. That he's been doing a lot of work with. He's done a really nice job with this, with his, considering that it's his first hound, and even so. And he ended up kind of having a bad experience on his first trial where, the dog did really well, but got kind of disqualified on a technicality. And instead of kind of building him up, the judge broke him down, kind of attacked everything that he did. And this judge kind of ended with you've got him in, does he live inside? Yeah. And he said, well, yeah. And he said, well, that's just terrible. People like you are ruining this, like really went off on him, and he called me kind of upset about it. And I was just like, don't listen to chuckleheads like that.
Don't get too upset there.
Right. Yeah. And you've got your guys inside. They live in your house.
Oh yeah.
Has that, I think I know the answer, and I hope that most people listening know the answer too, but I'm going to ask anyway. Has that affected their ability to hunt anyway?
It hurts me in field trial season, which is right now.
Okay.
Because right now, if I slide over here and look, there they are laying under the air conditioner. All right. Now, when you're at a field trial, when your dog makes it to winter's pack, what time of day do you think you're running winter's pack? 2-3 o'clock in the afternoon.
Right. Warm o'clock. Yeah.
Yeah. And just because they live inside, they gas out in the heat more.
Sure. Yeah.
Right. And, I had said something to my vet about that one time, and she said, well, you're going to have to get rid of air conditioning if you want to fix that. And she told a story to me that she read in a medical journal of sled dogs that were being flown somewhere. And in the cargo hold of the plane, it was like 40 degrees Fahrenheit. And when they got them out, they were panting and so overheated because they've been living out in sub-zero weather. And to fly. And so they were acclimated to that.
Sure. Oh, it's, it's something that with the sled dogs, we needed to be really aware of, because I have sled dogs still, and I've been running sled dogs for 24 years.
Yeah.
And, that's something we needed to be really aware of. If we had an injury or something like that we didn't then bring that dog, you sort of
into a building.
Well, we could bring it into a building. That was okay. But, you see these Disney movies where they bring them, wrap them in a blanket, put them down in front of the wood stove, blah, blah, blah. That's a real fast way to kill one of those dogs.
Yeah.
Because their lungs start to fill with fluid, like it's a bad deal.
Yeah.
And, it's the same going the other direction, too. You've got a dog that's used to the warmth and you toss it out in the cold. That dog's going to really struggle.
Right. Well, and see, I don't have any trouble hunting my dogs in sub-zero weather.
Okay.
I think because they're moving.
Sure. Yeah.
And they're generating their own energy and staying warm. I've had no trouble in the cold. The only negative thing I've found to having them in the house is if you're going to be, and I know guys that really do well in this sport that have free time at 3 PM, where typically I run either before work or after work. But the guys that do well in this sport, they're out at 2-3 o'clock in the afternoon, which is when you run winter's pack.
Mm-hmm.
And them dogs are getting conditioned to that weather.
Sure.
And they keep an eye on them to make sure it's not safe. I will say that my dogs don't have that 3 hour at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. You know, I'm not going to have them last 2-3 hours in that temp.
Right.
But I have no trouble in the winter. And I've had dogs inside, and now I find dogs that live in the house, in my experience, handle better for me in the field.
Yep. That is exactly my experience as well. That
I know guys that run dogs, and the only time the dog sees them is when they pick it up out of the kennel and take it into the woods.
Yep.
And then when they pick it up to go home. So every time that dog's circling a rabbit and sees its owner, it goes, oh boy, he's trying to pick me up to go home. I got to go. Right, because that's the only time that they see the guys, when it's time to go to the woods and when it's time to go. My dogs see me all the time, and I've had a lot of good pictures of dogs chasing rabbits. I just sit down right on the marked line where the rabbit run by, and I just sit there and click, 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 click until they get by. Them dogs never see me and think he's picking me up. Right, they see me so much,
Right.
And whereas
there's something.
I got friends.
That,
Yeah. I got friends that say, anytime, they drop the dog, sit on the tailgate and listen to the music. And then when the dog sees them, they're like, oh man, it's time to go home. I mean, that's what they think every time they see their owner.
Right. Yeah. Right. Yeah. It's, that's a great point. I can see the point in terms of acclimating. To the temperature. In my friend's case, that was not actually an issue for him. He ended up waiting until about 2 o'clock. So from 8 until about 2. The trial started at 8. He went at 2, and it was very hot enough so that I'll have him on the podcast so he can tell the whole story himself at some point. But it was really interesting to hear his first experience in the trialing world.
Right.
Because it was super negative.
And that happens to a lot. Yeah. I mean, I've had negative experiences at trials too.
Oh, sure. I mean, so I've had negative experiences at, sled dog races, AKC, obedience trials, things like that. And
in field trials, there's the reason the ad prints the judges' names.
Right.
Right. So, I mean, and it's not that I think some judges are bad and some are good, but some like a dog more the style that my dogs run, and some like a different style dog.
Sure.
You know what I mean?
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, and to be fair, judges are human too, and realistically, there's going to be some that they're kind of dickheads, and you may as well just avoid the trials with that one person there, and we've got people like that here, and I went to a sheepdog trial where last year, where a young guy came with a young dog and did really well, like better than a young guy with his first dog who was also young really should have done, and just didn't get any kind of a score. Just total garbage. And then this sort of little bit, young, pretty, athletic gal goes out there with her dog and has what, to my eye, is much more of a train wreck and gets a much, much better score. And he was like, I don't think I'm going to go to another trial with that guy as a judge. It's like, no biggie, but I'm not going to waste my time.
Some people judge the wrong end of the leash, right?
Right, exactly. That's a good way to put it. Yeah. So tell me about your current group of dogs. I want to touch on that before I let you here. How many do you have in the house right now, and what are their names? What are their relations to each other?
I got Duke, Costs, and Badger, who are basically retired.
Okay.
Badger had a real bad back injury. Still can't feel his feet.
Okay.
Entirely. And for a while we had, it was a lot of work, but I mean, he runs around like a demon now, but the vet says he shouldn't run them. So I got those retired, and I got Blitz, Jenny, and Diamond.
Okay. Gotcha.
And those are my kind of running dogs. And then once in a while, I'll get with my buddy Jason out in Massachusetts, and there might be a dog that I'll take for a little bit to work for him, or he'll take one of mine. And
okay, gotcha. And Jenny and Diamond, I assume, are females.
Yes.
Blitz?
Male.
Okay. Do you notice you're actually one of the first beaglers I've talked to who runs males.
Yeah.
A lot of guys that I talk to, and this is, I found that a lot of houndsmen here as well prefer females.
Yeah.
Why, you who runs both, why, what are sort of the pros and cons in your eyes?
I don't think I've ever made it through a whole hunting season, which starts at the end of October and goes to the end of February here, without my females coming in heat.
No, of course not.
Right?
Of course not.
So there's going to be downtime for those bitches. And so I've tend to had more male dogs than not over the years. This is kind of a different scenario for me now. And so I like males because they don't come in heat.
Mm-hmm.
I like males because they don't handle as well as females for me typically. And what I mean by that is, I've had females where if I discipline them for running a deer, right? If, they're, taking off on a deer and I decide they're going to ride the lightning today,
right?
They can be, and I have my settings are so low on my shot collars. I actually try every setting on myself. I put the shot collar on my wrist.
I do that as well.
What's that? Have you done that?
Oh, I've totally done that. Yeah.
It's like, it's like, all right, that's all I can take. That's all my dogs are getting. And I can tell you, I had Diamond when she was younger, took a deer, and the level that I got her on felt like putting a 9-volt battery on your tongue.
Yeah.
Not real bad, right?
Right.
She was devastated for the rest of the day, or for about an hour anyway. She was all devastated. I'm sorry. Or like, even if you just yell at them, hey, I've had females, they get into a gut pile or something, and they're a little sensitive and whatever.
Right.
But I think the reason most guys keep females is, let's say I have a male I like.
Yep.
Somebody has to want to breed to my male.
Right.
And if you got a female that you like, and you can go and breed to my mediocre to above average, maybe male, or you can go pay money and breed to the best male in the business.
Right.
Right. Whereas when you own females, if you're willing to pay $100 or give up a puppy, because it's not an expensive stud fee in the beagle world,
right?
At least in terms of hunting beagles, you can breed anywhere with your best bitch.
Sure.
And I think that's why a lot of guys tend to keep bitches.
That makes sense. The breeding aspect of it. I can see that. I was talking to a guy, Brian Phillips, here a couple of weeks ago, and he was saying that it was, for him, the reason he preferred females is that they didn't get sidetracked if there were other females in heat at field trials.
Yeah, well, and that's true, but I mean, in field trials, males and females run a different day, typically. So if you take a male to a field trial,
realize that. Wow, that's interesting.
Well, I could be wrong. That's AKC, I know.
Okay.
But typically, if there's females, it used to be traditionally they run males on Saturday, females Sunday.
Okay.
And then those males are never on ground that was scented, with the estrus or anything.
Right.
Now the days don't always stay traditional like they used to be, and it used to be 4 days: Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, and they ran, 13-inch males Friday, 15-inch males Saturday, then 13-inch bitches,
Sure.
15-inch bitches. But yeah, I mean, I love female dogs, and but it's, probably to me the biggest reason to keep males is so you can hunt all 4 months of rabbit
Yeah.
season.
It's I told that's why it surprised me when I got into the hunting dogs, because in the husky world, it's the males that are. I mean, there's some excellent females. Don't get me wrong, but it's the male pups that you're going to sell quickly.
And they're going to be bigger and stronger. I mean,
Bigger and stronger for the most part. Yep, but I mean the females can be really excellent leaders. They're a little bit more intuitive, so that they, sometimes they have the ability to use their brains a little bit more than the males can. Sometimes, there's good things to be said about having females in the team. However,
right.
We have these huskies, 365 days a year. We race 2 days a year. I can guarantee you that on those 2 days, the females in the team are going to be in heat.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter when I race, but I can guarantee it's
Yeah.
just like the Murphy's Law, I think, or whatever you would call it. It's just it never fails.
Right.
So it drove me crazy to the point where I had a team of almost exclusively males, because I just didn't want to have to deal with the heat. And that's what I've got for hunting dogs now. I have one female that was given to me really early on. The rest of my dogs are males, because I just don't want to have to deal with the heat. I want to be able to hunt all the time.
Yep.
And the female, she does great for the first month of the season, and then she comes into heat, and she's kind of this hormonal bomb, so she'll stay in heat for a good long time and won't function while she's in heat.
Right. And I can almost tell before the males in the house can tell.
Yeah.
And believe me, if you've ever had, well, I just had Jenny come out of heat here a little while ago, and I had 4 males in the house that lost their voice.
Okay.
So I'm letting Jenny and Diamond out at one time to go to the bathroom in the yard and putting them away. And then I got 4 males out that have been howling,
right, losing
their voice. And then when they get out in the yard, they all practice on each other in case one of them gets a chance to get to Jenny.
Right. Practice makes perfect.
And
blah, blah,
it's
blah.
just chaos. It's just chaos.
It is chaos. And that's what made it so that I, kind of naturally just kept going in the same side of the street that I was going on with the huskies, and that I just kept,
males.
Just kept males. Part of it is I don't think that there's a huge difference in terms of the mental toughness. I've seen some female lead dogs and some female hounds do some amazing things. Stand toe to toe alone with a bear. Or break trail for 7 hours.
Right.
In front of a dog team. I don't see any appreciable difference in terms of tenacity or natural ability or anything like that. It's purely the heat thing for me.
Right. And, while I did say I think the females tend to be a little more sensitive, that's often a good thing.
Yeah. For sure.
That's often a good thing that they're more sensitive. I mean, I can take Diamond and Jenny out and never look at my GPS to wonder where they are.
Right.
I whistle with my fingers. Here they come.
Right.
And I might never look at the GPS the whole time I'm out with them. And, and those are the 2 dogs that if I'm sitting on the couch at night that are going to be right up against my body.
Yep.
And so that sensitivity is a good thing. Yeah. I've heard guys that say the females are better at it. They're better hunters. They're better. I don't think the performance based on sex is that different. I see a bigger difference on performance based on 13-inch versus 15-inch, which in the Beagle world, I don't know if anybody else has 4 classes of dogs. You split them up by sex first and then big and little, you know.
What do you
But
have,
I
by the
see,
way?
well, I measured Diamond and the bar fell off of her. So she's like 10 and a half.
Okay.
Blitz is like 11 and a half, 12.
Yeah.
Haas and Duke, I've pre-measured at trials when they were young. They almost always were. It depends on how they stood them. They're around 13. They're probably both 13 and a quarter all day long.
Sure.
But if you measure out for winner's pack, you're done. So I would pre-measure them. They've ran in 13 and 15, depending on how they stood for the judge and how they dropped the bar that day. And of course, Jenny's 14 and something all day long.
Okay.
Yep. But
interesting.
And, you know, I don't know how people predict that. People seem to think they can breed a litter and say, well, these are going to be 15. You know, in any litter I've bred, I just never know. In fact, Diamond at 10 and a half inches,
yeah,
she was the biggest pup in her litter when she was born.
Isn't that the darndest thing? That's happened to me a couple of times with the Huskies.
Like by a lot.
By a lot, yeah. Like born several hundred grams bigger, and then ends up being this, you know, flyweight, teeny tiny.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
But you were saying what the performance difference between 15 and 13. What do you see there?
Okay, so, and this is not all, I mean, there are exceptions to this. I've known guys with little dogs that are, you know, like Speedy Gonzalez. Mm-hmm. But over the course of the day, you get that dog 15 inches versus a dog that's 10 and a half. Mm-hmm. Number one, by nature, that bigger dog's probably going to be faster.
Sure.
Not always. It depends on the breeding for sure. And it's going to have more endurance. It'll often do better in snow. But that's not always the case either. I've had beagles like Diamond float on top of the snow. Mm-hmm. And I've had 3 generations of dogs now that will look at rabbit footprints in the snow when the scent's tough, and they'll just use their eyes, put their nose in that rabbit. They know what a rabbit track looks like.
Sure. Wow. That's impressive.
And, you know, they're going to do better no matter what their size. And in fact, Duke, which is Diamond's father, did the same thing on a beach on Cape Cod. We went hunting beach bunnies, we called it, on Cape Cod.
Cool.
And they would go down by the breakwater. We had 4 or 5 dogs in there, me and my buddy from Massachusetts, Jason.
Yeah. And
I heard him yelling. I couldn't make out his words because, you know, he's from New England. So he drops R's that belong there and adds R's where they don't. You know what I mean? You know,
yeah.
I got an idea.
I'm from New England. Yep.
I got an idea. Let's get in the car.
Right.
And I can figure out when he drops an R. It's still a mystery to me when you add an R.
Right.
I haven't figured out that grammatical rule yet, but I know his son is named Noah, who he always calls Knower. But anyway, I can hear him yelling at me in Bostonese, and I don't know what the hell he's saying. And the only dog I could hear was Duke. And then the rabbit comes up and I shoot it. He was down by the breakwater. I said, "What were you yelling?" He said, "The dog was looking at footprints in the sand." and I said, "Well, I've seen him do it on snow. How big could the footprints be in the sand?" And he looked at me real shocked. His eyes got wide. "Not very effing big," he says to me.
That's amazing. That's
but I think the bigger dogs do tend to have more endurance. They're better in the more open areas. And mm-hmm. Then I got a dog like Diamond. If I go into blowdowns and clear cuts, she will belly crawl through that mass of vegetation that the other dogs can't get into. Sure. And they're going nuts trying to get to her.
Right.
And she just on her belly, going through, and them, so I think they're better in some of the thick cover, and there's exceptions to that too. I've had dogs so muscular that they make a brush pile breathe.
Right. 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 Yeah. That is really interesting to me, the difference in sizes. Cause I mean, it's not something that really in any other sport we talk about.
No.
In the coon hounds and stuff like that, like you don't break it down. To my knowledge, I can't think of a competition that breaks it down into size.
Right.
They don't do it with the sled dogs. They don't do it with the sheep dogs.
Right.
A 60-pound male is going to be competing against a 22-pound female. Like that's just how it's going to be.
And AKC, they used to have official measurement cards. So if you had a borderline dog like I'm talking about, you get a card, you go to 2 trials or 3. As soon as that dog measures into the same class twice, you get an official measurement card. That's what that dog is forever.
Okay.
So if you get it 13 or under twice, it's a 13-inch dog. If it's over 13 twice, it's a 15-inch dog.
Okay.
And people tend to want to get the bigger male measured officially 13.
Okay. Yep.
So down here in Pennsylvania, that's a big thing. There tend to be less 13-inch males and more 15-inch, right? And it's the opposite with the females. So like all dogs, there's sexual dimorphism going on there. The females tend to be smaller and the males tend to be bigger and all that.
Yep.
I've seen official 15-inch dogs from up north that I guarantee are 17 inches all day long.
Right.
That somebody dropped the bar, the dog had its legs splayed out when they dropped the bar and measured it and everything.
Right.
And I can see why. I've been to the Canadian border hunting with guys, and them 16, 17-inch dogs all day long in that snow have a distinct advantage to my dogs that are chest deep in it the whole time, Right. So I totally understand that tendency. It sounds like I'm picking on the guy for getting the tall dog measured in for field trials and everything, but I totally see why they go for that.
I see why they do it. That's a little bit underhanded. You got to admit. Put a little peanut butter on the floor between the dog's legs and measure it then. Yeah, it's like...
Or you just make sure the guy measuring the dog is a friend of yours, and when they stand the dog up, the front legs go like this, and they drop down,
Right.
But, I mean, and, I know guys that prefer to run little males and big bitches because they tend to be smaller classes.
Okay.
So you got less dogs to beat.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Sure. Yep.
And then the flip side of that is you need 3 wins and 120 points. I've seen guys with 5, 6 wins and little males, and they're nowhere near 120 points because the classes are so small.
So small. Sure.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Wow. There's a lot to keep track of with the beagles. Like I had no idea about the trialing aspect of things before I got Mike, the beagle that I've got now, the pup that I've got now, and they don't do trialing here in the same way that they do it over there.
Right.
So over here it's not uncommon at all to use beagles on deer.
Yeah, that's big in the South here too.
Yeah, and it's so you can actually get them. You can actually trial them on deer and get their sort of hunting champion status certificate, whatever you call it, on deer and hare. Are, I believe, your 2 options. I think you could do it on fox too if you wanted to. I'm not actually sure, but the way they do it there, it's so much more complicated. Like I don't think they have classes here in terms of like the size of the beagles. Anything, it's a beagle. Okay, fine. Deer. Okay, fine. That's like the end of the story. You go out and you do your thing. Right. That's it. It's it's got to be such a...
And there's stylistic differences too, right? So I had mentioned about those traditional brace dogs, and I mean they're so slow. Like I told you, they'll go 20 yards and it's over.
Right.
And it takes an hour to do it or something. I don't know. Then there's gun dog brace, which looks for a hunting dog. They're quicker, but you run 2 at a time or 3 at the most.
Mm-hmm.
Then you have small pack option where your first series, you'll roll out your packs and you'll run, 4 to 7.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's large pack where every dog in that class runs at once. Right. So if there's 35 entries and the big males, all 35 are down at once and running together.
Wow.
And, and I'm okay with things that contradict themselves, but I agree with 2 people, and I say I agree with both of them, and people say you can't agree with both of them. Bob Baker, who owned Better Beagling when I started writing for them, you know, all them years ago, he said large pack is the only fair format because every dog is running on the same hare up there, typically hare, not rabbit, or rabbit. They're all running the same exact game under the same exact scenting conditions.
Sure. Yep.
And he said, but in your small pack world down there, that pack that runs on morning dew has a way bigger advantage over the pack that doesn't come out till 11 o'clock or noon.
Right. Sure. Yeah.
So I'm like, yeah, I totally agree with that. I totally agree with you, Bob. And then old Roger Alderman, who's passed away, he was part owner of SPO magazine when that existed. He said the only fair format is gun dog brace. You got two dogs head to head and you can sort them out better.
Right.
When you evaluate them. And so I tell people all the time, I agree with both of those statements, but most people would say, no, you got to go one or the other. But, you know, I can. And in fact, the triple challenge that they do down in Aldie, Virginia every year, you run on one day, you run brace. The next day they run all the entries, big, little, female. Yeah. Oh yeah. It's dogs, bitches, big and little. They run all 30. And then that day they also have a show dog there, or a show dog judge that judges them on the bench.
Sure.
And there's a lot of people that go there just to win first on the bench.
Okay.
And these dogs can't really run a rabbit or not very well. They can me too behind the pack, right?
Right.
But they go there just for that award. But it's kind of interesting. They make you do the brace, they make you do the, you know, large pack, and then they, you know, put them on the bench. A friend of mine, Leo, I went there before Badger's injury, wound up 3rd overall.
Mm-hmm.
He was 5th in the field both days. And Badger looks like a well-fed coyote with short hair. He doesn't look like Uno, right? He doesn't look like that Uno dog that won the Westminster, you know, all those years ago.
Right.
He just looks like a well-fed coyote, short-haired. And he was like 15 or 16 out of 30.
Right.
You know,
on the bench. Sure.
On the bench. 3rd overall. My buddy Leo had a dog, was 2nd in the field both days.
Yeah.
Because she finished 30 out of 30 on the bench, she was well out of the top 10.
That's terrible.
All 3 facets were evaluated the same. She was 2nd in the field both day and dropped down well out of the top 10.
That's terrible.
Yeah. But I mean, there were show dog guys there that's all they care. It's, I guess, pretty prestigious if you win just the show. Everybody else that's there wants to win the overall.
Right.
You know.
Right. Wow, that's interesting. That's really interesting. Boy, it's a lot to keep track of. It's it's going to take me a few more years, I think, to figure all this stuff out. It's
and at the end of it all, I just like listening to dogs chase.
Yeah, right. Isn't that the base? Like, isn't that the bottom line?
Yeah.
At least it should be. Yeah. Well, that's really, really interesting. I think. Yeah, no, that's really interesting. I'm going to try to get, at some point, I would love to do a podcast where I get a beagler from over here and a beagler from over there to sit down and sort of
compare,
argue about whose system is better.
Oh,
make it as contentious as possible. And
I probably wouldn't argue, you know, over the, you know, the competition formats, because that's, but they do have competitions for having beagles on hair.
They do, but not together. They'll have it's like the dog is competing basically against a total itself in a total point system. They'll start with as many points as they're possibly going to get,
and then they get minus.
And then they get minus as they go.
Yeah,
and the dog is run on its own. It's not
solo. Yeah.
It's totally solo, and it's based off of its own performance. And you know, hopefully, you get a judge that takes into account the scenting conditions, the weather conditions, these different things. Which, on the one hand, makes it. I don't totally know how I feel about it yet, because it's on the one hand, you almost get the impression that it makes it a little bit more fair. You know, if you've got a dog that's really done some great work in some really tough conditions, you might still get a pass.
Right.
On the other hand, it can be a little bit wishy-washy. It's not real concrete. You're not competing against another dog. You're kind of, if you get a judge that's feeling generous that day, there have been some dogs that I've hunted with, not beagles, but like the Norwegian elk hounds
Yeah.
that they use on moose over here. There have been a couple of those that I've hunted with that have been hunting champions. They've gone through like the process and been judged and deemed champions. Who,
Right.
I mean, I would be better off with playing music on my phone, walking through the woods. It's like they're on paper they're good, but
Right.
they're
Right.
in reality they're not. And I think that's maybe a little bit of the weakness of having it be quite as up to each judge's.
And you have sort of similar things, right? So here you need 3 wins and 120 points.
Yeah.
So, but I had mentioned those old traditional brace dogs that can't circle a rabbit.
Mm-hmm.
The scent's going to get too cold. The talk you hear a lot is, and some of the dogs that are harder hitting on the front of a pack,
Mm-hmm.
what winds up happening is they get to a breakdown where the rabbit changed directions, a check.
Sure.
And your hard hitting dog is out 50, 60 yards looping, and you get a dog with more line control who solves the check, then that hard hitting dog jumps back in front.
Right.
Until the same thing happens again. And you hear people say this, I'm not going to accuse anybody's dog of anything, but you hear people say that dog is a field champion, and if you put it on the ground by itself, it could not circle a rabbit.
Right.
Right.
I know which of those two things I would like.
Right. And I've always said, you know what they should do? Require the 3 wins and the 120 points. And then some judge has to watch that dog find its own rabbit and circle it.
Yep.
By itself solo. Then, hey, you just certify the 3 wins and the 120 points and go with it.
100%.
Yeah. I mean, that being said, I'm not the most serious field trial guy.
Right.
I go there to hawk books and, get a few, kind of ribbons. I've never had field champions. I've had dogs with a couple wins, but I've never had field champions. I
Right.
go there to find what I want to breed to next and sell a few books.
Right. That makes sense. That makes sense. Yeah. I mean, that makes total sense to me. It's the competitions are a good way to, get a little bit of a lay of the land in terms of what's out there and, get an idea what your next step's going to be eventually, and it's, it's the social aspect.
It's fun.
Yeah,
it's fun.
It's fun. It's just fun.
It's fun as long as, a friend of mine, John Gibble, once said, he put it in print in an article he wrote, and now everybody says it. And I think he was the first to say it. He would say, a man's ego is a very heavy thing for a dog to carry.
Yeah. Oh, it's I love
or
that
something
saying.
like that.
Yeah,
I'm paraphrasing.
I've heard that saying as well. I have no idea where I first heard it, but I love that saying. Yeah, it's
and if you get that guy whose whole life is invested in those achievements, that as long as you can go to a trial and not necessarily win or even place, I mean, they're fun.
Yeah.
Yeah. And but yeah.
No, that's interesting. It's the whole thing is interesting, but I love that saying. It's a great saying. It's was circulating in the dog mushing world there for a little while as well.
And I don't know when John wrote that. Maybe he's heard it somewhere, but I think he was the first I know to write it, maybe in the 80s or something.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't hear it until like the last few years. So, I mean, it probably, that would be really cool if he was the first one to write it and it just kind of spread to these other dog sports as well, that sentiment.
Oh, it's just such a great
sentiment.
Yeah. I'll have to ask him sometime.
That would be really cool. Yeah. I'd be interested to hear.
I'll have to ask him what year he wrote that, because I'm not sure. But yeah, it's
it's a great saying. It is. Well, Bob, we are up at, let me see here, over an hour and a half here.
Oh man, you're gonna have to do some editing now, huh?
I might have to do some editing. I think it's going to be Colby this time who does the editing. So thank you, Colby. I appreciate it. But I think I'm going to let you go here.
Yeah.
I really, really appreciate you coming on. It was a lot of fun to talk to you. I've wanted to talk to you for a long time. Like I said, I've loved your books and love your presence on social media. Facebook can be social media can be a pretty dark place these days. And I always look forward to seeing you pop up.
I put most of the dog stuff on my author page.
Yeah.
Most, not all. And then I try when I have, and sometimes I write these while I'm running dogs in the morning too. I try to write something slightly theological, biblical, uplifting, pastoral on there.
Sure.
And, I think I'm actually going to have a book of those published at some point. I was talking to my publisher, but
oh, great.
And there's people that like them. I mean, it's not everybody, but I would say, oh, I really like that. Now I say, I get so tired of coming on here and just seeing meanness.
Yeah, I'm the exact same way. The only thing you will see on my Facebook is
dogs
and dad jokes.
Yeah. I mean, how many times can I listen to the 308 versus 30-06 debate where people get super
upset about it? It's the most ridiculous thing. It's like they're looking for things to get upset about. It's like, okay, what's the difference between Heinz mayonnaise and Hellman's mayonnaise? And like people will get personal.
Oh yeah.
They'll get bent out of shape, man. It's
the whole anonymous aspect of the keyboard. They just lose their cookies over this stuff, It's just like, oh yeah.
It's too funny. It's too funny. All right, well, I really appreciate you coming on.
Yep.
And we will I might have to get you back on here at some point.
Okay.
This was a lot of fun.
All right, man. Appreciate it.
I appreciate it as well. Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Man, I love that sound.